So, when everything was closed down because of the Rona, there was kind of a pretty quick sort of like politicization of that whole thing, where there were some folks who felt that this was government overreach in not allowing churches to meet in person, which I personally, we struggled with it too. I remember that week of March 15th, like the stomach turning in my stomach turning over, deciding, and we decided on like Thursday the 12th or whatever that was to not hold services, and then we just haven't been back since. We thought it was going to be like 2 weeks and then be back, but we all know that
we'll be
didn't
back
happen.
by Easter. Nope.
Yeah. So anyway, a lot of pastors reacted around the country, and my state is no different. And there's an area here called Dundalk, and a pastor made it into the news because I know you guys down there with Rodney Howard-Browne, that whole thing.
Yep.
It's kind of a similar thing, but this guy is on video. The news picked up this story. This was back in May, but he's on video tearing up a cease and desist order at his gathering, and maybe we can put the link in the show notes. But he's tearing up a cease and desist order, and of course he's saying that we're going to do things God's way. We're not going to let the government tell us what to do, all that stuff. And so, for me, it's just I don't understand. I know that there is government overreach sometimes, but I don't understand how there are those who don't see that this is essentially the same thing as having a fire code or building codes in your building. So, I've had a number of conversations with folks who will say, well, the government shouldn't be able to tell the church anything. And it's like, but I mean, they tell us how to build our building. They tell us how many people we can have in our building. So where do you guys land on that is, I guess, my question. And then I have a funny take of this story that kind of is one solution that a pastor had. But what's your take on that? Like, where's the line for you of like overreach?
For me, the overreach was when the pastor here in Tampa was actually arrested, because that you knew that A, that's exactly what he wanted. He wanted to get his face in every newspaper in America, and he succeeded. And B, they dropped charges within 24 hours. So it was him and the county sheriff, who was his buddy, having a contest to see who would win. But I was all like, this guy's an idiot, this guy's an idiot, this guy's an idiot. And then the minute they arrested him, I was like, but constitutionally, he's allowed to be an idiot, and his church is allowed to do idiotic things according to the First Amendment. So that was kind of where my take was. Like, our church wasn't meeting at that time, so I was watching that from the sideline, thinking, shame on this guy for endangering his people. As a pastor, he needs to be a better steward of the people that God has entrusted to him. But shame on the county sheriff for arresting him as well, because the Constitution has made it very clear that he has a right to be an idiot.
But what hurts is not just that he was endangering his congregation, but it hurts because that's what the national media picks up. So then all Christians are painted in this light. And then Those are the texts that I'm getting from my, unbelieving friends, family, like, wow, I can't believe what you guys are doing. Like, no, that's not you guys. That's not all of us. That is a few who are opting to go down this road, and I see it, it just kind of hurts all of us when people do stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think the response, oh man, it really is contextual, because like when it's all first started, it was just Corona, just COVID, and then all of a sudden now we have protesters, and I think it's making some of those pastors who weren't as vocal now saying, well, hey, we can meet over here at the courthouse and go inside this building, but we can't meet in the church. So now I'm going to put my stake down. And it's like, well, I don't know if even now is the right time to wield that, because obviously there are more pastoral things that we need to lean into now instead of going back to this other one. But I know, and at least in our community, the way that's been presented is you can gather over here, but not over here. It's bolstering the I don't know if you want to call it the hostility, but the angst against it.
I mean, I think I don't know. I'm not a constitutional rights expert by any stretch. I don't think any of us are. But when it comes to the freedom of religion and and then even the conversation later about separation of church and state, it's like I feel like some of the stuff that's being mandated and stuff like that is because we're in a global health crisis. And it's like, because we're in like unique circumstances, there are special exemptions that the government gets to do during like a global crisis like this. I mean, this is why like, I mean, I don't know, not to say I agree with this, but like this is why the president has the authority to like send in the National Guard when the governor needs help with rioters or something, right? Like there's these special exemptions that happen during special situations. To me, when I hear this type of stuff, I think the blame is more on the pastor being just like self-centered, like look at me, I'm going to cause a big scene and kind of just flex on everyone for the sake of flexing, because at the end of the day, if we're being honest, all that's just a political move. It's to get more attention and maybe rile up more people who they know would agree that the government is overreaching, and so they're causing a scene to make the government overreach. And to me, that's on the pastor being boneheaded. You know what I'm saying? Like it goes back to that thing we talked about in the first episode, where it's like, I get convicted with those pastors that talk about living quiet, meek lives. It's like, should we be bolstering these like moves as pastors just to get attention and then use like political leanings to get a high five from a congregant or another church? Like, to me, that's nonsense. And it's a distraction from the gospel, and where we need to be focusing on like caring for our people through what is essentially probably one of the most difficult times in the past 20 years for most of our churches, right? Like since 9/11, there's nothing that's been such a global reach in terms of hurt and pain and uncomfortableness. But I don't like the government there's slippery slopes here, because like I even think about what we're happening now with like masks, and then like the conversation, well, if masks is required by everybody in the entire city, but religious institutions are exempt from it, it's like the Holy Spirit is not going to like cover us from germs, right? Like we should be wearing masks too, right? Like there's not like something special, like a special cloud, as much as people want to believe there is, over churches, that when we say we're exempted from other things in the city, that like we're safer from it, or like something should apply in the church. And I think giving the discretion to the pastor to make those decisions is great, but man, it doesn't help when you have like Tim said, people who are making bad examples for us, and then now we're having to front conversations from both sides of the conversation within our own church, because they can say, well, so and so down the street is open, why aren't you open? Or so and so down the street doesn't require to wear masks, why are you requiring it? Like, it makes things way more complicated when like we're all on the same team, at least in theory, right?
And it's getting difficult now because churches are now shutting down again where we are. So the two big churches right next to me, one announced this past week and one announced today that they will not be in service on Sunday. It'll be online only. So now I have people looking to me saying, okay, what's our next move? And I'm trying to follow the guidelines of our, local and state officials. And Andrew and I have had this conversation that nobody wins here. And in a sense, we're all wrong. We're all going to mess up.
One of the things that, and again, I don't want to defend any pastor who's endangering the lives of his congregants, because that's just foolishness. But where my church is, we are right in the middle of a downtown, not like a skyscraper downtown, but like a walking downtown with bars and restaurants and, bed and breakfasts and stuff like that. And so the restaurants, the hotels, they all have licenses from the state, the city, the county, whatever it may be. You have a liquor license, you have a business license, you have whatever it is that your municipality issues you once you meet the requirements to be one of those things. We don't have a church license. So the city has not come and said, you have the license to operate as a church here. And so they cannot suspend our church license if we don't listen to what they say. Again, we are not the people who are trying to go and be open when we should be closed. If anything, we're trying to be more cautious than we should be. But I understand why people would react in extreme ways when overreaching is present.
And I think if we're going to be honest, we call it overreach, but if we're just going to be like super revealing, a lot of it's pretty carnal, right? Like, I don't want to shut down my church, because if the church down the road isn't shut down, where might my people go? And I think like as pastors, we have to own that is actually stemming from our insecurity. Like, and one of the things I'm learning in this entire crisis is, before this, you led mostly, in a lot of ways as senior pastors from the platform, but now that's been yanked out from up under us. And now we're having to lead from the pastoring side of things, those one-on-one conversations, those emails, those things that just drag on and on and on. It's harder, at least for me. It's way harder. It's way harder. So for me to not shut church down or whatever, that's actually saying, hey, I don't have to do as much of the other heavy lifting that really I know I need to be doing. So that's something that I've
and let's be real. As youth pastors, it was kind of like, budget, smudge it. Who cares? Here's what the line item says that I have to spend. I'm going to spend 10% over that so I get more in the budget next year, and boom, we're good. And as the leaders either of a campus or of a congregation, now we're looking at this thing going, oh boy, like if there's not butts and seats, there might not be checks and plates. That's a scary thing. There's a lot of leading out of fear.
I would say just to push back on what you said, Andrew, just to play devil's advocate, the comparison to like restaurants and bars with like a liquor license, but as churches that have buildings, we do have a certificate of occupancy, which is the same as every other business that has a building. So there's a sense in which those licenses are not applying. Those licenses are telling them that what they can do in the building, which we don't have, but it's not. So to me, I look at the government saying you can't have more than 50 people or whatever in the same way that I look at a fire code, which is applied evenly to every structure. Commercial, one thing for commercial, one thing for residential. And to me, this falls under that category. So I don't see it as, I do think there can be cases of specific overreach, but I don't see these things particularly as overreach. And I would say constitutionally, nobody is saying we can't practice our religion. They're just saying we can't meet in this particular building, which is, I mean, all of us have said for years, the church is in a building, the church is in a building, the church is in a building. So, I guess for me, I struggle to buy that, like, well, if they tell us we can't be in our building, then they're picking on us. They're discriminating against us and saying we can't practice our religion, which I don't think that's what's happening. I think that could happen. And I think that we have to keep watch because it absolutely could happen. But I don't see that as, and so for a pastor to rip up a cease and desist order up here, for instance, he had been meeting despite the orders for no businesses to have more than 10 people indoors. And he was kind of saying, well, I don't have to do that because I have a right. But to me, for me, it's a different category. And I think for me, it's a category mistake. So on top of the thing, like you said, that we're probably all being more safe than we need to. I was going to say there's a funny version of this. A pastor in Argentina basically made that argument that why are bars and restaurants allowed to be open and churches are not. So he dressed himself and all his staff up as waiters and carried the Bibles in on trays and opened the church and made his church into a bar so they could have a service. So that's a creative way you could handle it.
There was one church, they actually smashed in one of their own windows, and said, we are having a protest. We are protesting evil or whatever. And they had church and called it a protest. But, you bring up a really good point, because like as pastors, I'm super on board with y'all. It's our job to pastor the flock, to care, to love them, and to not make it more difficult for people to see the gospel, but once you tell that person who is, anti-mask, anti-shutdown, you don't always get that heart sentiment back. You get, well, hey, they're protesting here. Hey, the abortion clinic was open, so we can kill our kids, but we can't bring them to church. And but that's what's going to come back at us when we talk, So I think we have to be very, and kind of like when we were talking about in the last podcast, like that's reality for a lot of our people. So how do we not just glaze over it and give them the Jesus juke card? Like, how do we meet them in that anxiety and take them to the next step?
And we've all been at work, and work looks different now, but what we're all getting paychecks. We're all going about our normal life. If anything, we're working harder than we have been. We need to give people the benefit of the doubt who are at extreme anxiety levels because they're just wanting to get back to work. They're wanting to get back to life. So again,
Agreed.
like I'm going to be overly cautious, but I also understand the thinking of people that are just ready to be done with everything.
Oh, absolutely. I want to be back in church too. I mean,
yeah, it's way more work to do it this way.
All, and not even just a work thing, but like on a theological level, we all believe incarnational ministry is like, Zoom can never replace face-to-face.
Yeah.
And like, I say that every week on Church Online. Like, I know this is, I'm glad for the technology, but it's never going to replace it. So it just puts us in that weird space where, like Delmar, you were saying people have different expectations. And I've struggled with, like, what do you do when you're the pastor and you are one of the ones who's not comfortable being inside yet? And folks are like looking at you like, well, of course you want to have church, don't you? And inside you're like, I mean, if you guys want to have church inside, I'm not coming in there to preach. It's like there's that struggle too.
Yeah, I think it's been really beneficial for us to have elders on different sides of the spectrum here. So we have some very conservative and then some who are like, we're ready to go. And then one of our elders has not come back to the building, will not be back. He's just said, look, my wife has kind of put her foot down here. This is where I'm at. And I respect that. But he brings a really balanced voice to the board whenever we meet and have to make decisions like this.
I think that a North Star for me has been every time I see that, the problem's not the problem. Yeah. When there's anxiety over the mask, the problem is not the problem. I think you guys are hinting at it major. It's people been stuffed up in their house. Some people, their kids might be driving them crazy. Some people they're social people, so they need it. So here I have these arguments over here I can use for why I should be able to go places. That's what I'm going to identify as the problem. But our job as a pastor is to help get to the real problem.
And I think there's one more thing that in that list too. Yes, people are social people. People want to be around people. I think also a lot of people are scared and they don't know how to process fear. And so, I think for so much of us in America, we have lived these very comfortable lives where fear is not necessarily a thing that's a part of our normal lives. So a dependency on God is not necessarily a real tangible aspect. It's just something we say in name only. And so we fight tooth and nail. I mean, Jeff, you said it earlier, and that's the biggest thing. It's like we say for years, church is not a building, but only thing that people are talking about is when can we get back in the building? And it's like, have we not listened to our preaching the past, forever?
I mean, have I not listened to me preaching that? Because I'm in the same boat. Yeah. But one of the things I think is driving people's desire to, religious people to get back to church in the gathering that I see in a lot of folks that I know is like all of their versions of their escapism have been taken away from them. So maybe they use work to escape from issues at home, or they use going out to eat to escape from having real conversations with people. So we just fill our lives up with hurry and busyness. And then that all just got taken away. And so now we're just stuck dealing with ourself and we don't like it. And so I think there's a sense in which some of it is people just wanting to get back to some activity.